The early morning fog hung heavy over the English Channel on June 6, 1944, a shroud of anticipation and dread. For Lieutenant Dean Rockwell, gripping the radio handset aboard landing craft tank 2273, the pre-dawn darkness offered little comfort. He could barely discern the colossal silhouettes of 32 amphibious Sherman tanks, their canvas screens jutting out like anachronistic siege towers against the bruised horizon. This wasn't just another day. This was the day. D-Day, the Allied invasion of Normandy. And, as the message crackled through, "Her hour confirmed. Hero 6:30 hours. Beach obstacles identified. Heavy fortifications intact." The sheer magnitude of the gamble became terrifyingly clear. Captain Ned Elder of the 743rd Tank Battalion, his binoculars pressed against his face, scanned the churning 5-foot swells. The decision he made in that moment, under the immense pressure of impending battle, would reverberate far beyond the immediate landing. The DD tanks, designed to swim ashore with their canvas skirts, were ill-suited for such brutal conditions. Elder made a pivotal choice. His tanks would not swim. They would ride their landing craft directly onto the beaches. It was a calculated risk, exposing the vulnerable landing craft to direct fire. But the alternative was a certain watery grave for his precious armor and their crews before they even fired a shot. What none of them could fully grasp then was that this single, pragmatic decision, born of necessity and an almost instinctual grasp of the realities of warfare, would become the catalyst for one of the most unexpected and devastating armored breakthroughs in the entire European theater. The conventional wisdom, especially within the German Wehrmacht, held that their mighty Tigers and Panthers were the undisputed apex predators of the battlefield. The hedgerows of France had already borne witness to their perceived invincibility. Superior armor that shrugged off most Allied shells, devastating 80mm guns that could punch through almost anything, and a mechanical precision that made them formidable in defensive positions. German armored doctrine had meticulously carved out kill zones across the Norman countryside. Hundreds of concealed positions, anti-tank guns zeroed in on every conceivable approach, intricate networks of tank traps, and obstacles designed to funnel Allied armor into predetermined killing fields. It was a seemingly flawless defensive strategy, built on the premise of technical superiority and strategic foresight. But, as the Sherman tanks, like iron behemoths, churned through the English Channel at a modest 4 knots, their Chrysler 57 multibank engines straining against 33 tons of steel and sheer determination, they represented a fundamentally different philosophy of war. Each M4A4 Sherman, even with its duplex drive system adding bulk, was a testament to American industrial might and pragmatic design. Staff Sergeant Paul Reagan, peering from the commander's hatch of his tank aboard LCT 600, understood the weight of expectation. His tank carried 90 rounds of 75mm ammunition, 4,150 rounds of 30 caliber machine gun ammunition, and the collective hopes of an entire amphibious assault. This wasn't just a machine. It was a mobile symbol of America's industrial philosophy at its most pragmatic and unyielding. Let's pause for a moment and consider this divergence in military doctrine, because it forms the very core of the story of the Sherman versus the Panther and Tiger. The German approach, epitomized by its heavy tanks, was an ode to engineering perfection. A single Tiger tank, a marvel of mechanical complexity, cost an astronomical 250,000 Reichsmarks, and demanded specialized maintenance crews, often requiring days, sometimes weeks, to keep operational. They were bespoke machines, handcrafted instruments of war, each one a testament to German ingenuity and a reflection of a nation straining its industrial capacity to produce the absolute best. The American philosophy, in stark contrast, was about overwhelming superiority through numbers, reliability, and ease of maintenance. The Sherman was the embodiment of this. It was designed to be mass-produced, to be shipped across vast oceans, and, crucially, to be maintained by relatively untrained personnel. Farm boys from Kansas, as the saying went, using basic tools. This wasn't a slight on the crews. It was a design triumph. Chrysler's Detroit tank arsenal alone, by 1944, was churning out over 400 Shermans every month. The mathematics of this contrast are compelling, almost brutal in their simplicity. While Germany, despite its legendary engineering prowess, struggled to produce perhaps 100 Tigers monthly, American factories, a continent away, were manufacturing over 2,000 Shermans every single month at peak production. When you factored in mechanical reliability, fuel consumption, the Panther achieved a dismal 1 mile per gallon on roads and half that cross-country, and the sheer ease of repair, the equation became overwhelmingly skewed in favor of the American approach. This wasn't merely a difference in tank design, it was a clash of entire industrial ecosystems, national philosophies, and approaches to modern warfare. Tank Commander William Focusad, a veteran of the 743rd Tank Battalion who trained at Camp Laguna, Arizona, understood this implicitly. A man who would later earn a Silver Star and a Purple Heart, Focusad grasped that victory in mechanized warfare wasn't solely about the thickness of your armor or the caliber of your gun. It was about consistently putting steel on target, about maintaining a relentless operational tempo, and, most critically, about adapting to the ever-shifting battlefield conditions faster than the enemy could possibly react. It was about the system, not just the individual component. Meanwhile, aboard Panther No. 424 of the 2nd Panzer Division, Unteroffizier Klaus Weber reviewed his ammunition loadout. 79 rounds for the long-barreled 75mm Kurohe 42 gun, 4,200 rounds of machine gun ammunition. His Panther's frontal armor, a formidable 100mm thick and sloped at 55 degrees, presented an effective thickness of 140mm. The American 75mm guns, he knew, couldn't penetrate it beyond 100 meters. Weber's 45-ton tank, powered by a fuel-hungry Maybach HL230 P30 engine, was a defensive marvel. Positioned hull down in a Norman hedgerow with interlocking fields of fire, the Panther didn't need to move. It only needed to kill. The German defensive positions at Omaha Beach represented 2 years of back-breaking fortification work. Whiterstand's Nest 62, or WN62, a formidable nest overlooking the Easy Red sector, bristled with multiple machine gun positions, a 50 anti-tank gun, and mortar pits. Hinrich So, manning an MG-42 machine gun, would later make the extraordinary claim of firing over 12,000 rounds, a figure historians consider greatly exaggerated but indicative of the sheer volume of fire. These were kill zones designed for mathematical perfection. Overlapping fields of fire ensured no dead space where attackers could find cover. Pre-registered artillery coordinates meant mortars could rain down shells anywhere on the beach within 30 seconds of target identification. It was a meat grinder designed to be inescapable. At 0550, On June 6th, Captain Elder, aboard LCT 2037, observed the sea state through spray-soaked binoculars. Waves were a daunting 5 to 6 feet, wind force 18 knots from the west. The canvas screens of the DD tanks, designed for a mere 3-foot sea, would undoubtedly collapse in these conditions. Of the 64 Sherman DD tanks scheduled to swim ashore at Omaha Beach, only 29 would even attempt it. And of those 29, belonging to the 701st Tank Battalion on the eastern sectors, a heartbreaking 27 would sink into the frigid depths of the English Channel, their crews either drowned or rescued, never having fired a shot. But Elder's 743rd Tank Battalion would not launch their tanks into the churning water. His 32 DD tanks, along with their support vehicles, would ride their LCTs directly onto dog green and dog red beaches. This meant exposing the thin-skinned landing craft, essentially large, vulnerable boxes, to direct enemy fire. But the alternative, watching his tanks and their crews disappear beneath the waves, was unacceptable. The mathematics of his decision were stark, brutal in their simplicity. Risk the landing craft and their naval crews, or lose the tanks and their army crews before they could even contribute to the fight. Elder chose to risk the craft, a decision that speaks volumes about battlefield leadership and prioritization under impossible circumstances. At ERO 6:15, the naval bombardment commenced. The USS Texas unleashed 14-inch shells at the bluffs above Omaha. The USS Arkansas added 12-inch rounds. Smaller destroyers daringly crept within 1,000 yards of the beach, firing directly at visible fortifications. The bombardment was intended to last a pulverizing 40 minutes, annihilating German positions before the first wave of infantry hit the sand. In reality, it was a disaster. Most shells overshot their targets, falling harmlessly inland. Low clouds forced the heavy bombers to release their payloads late, their bombs also missing the critical beach defenses. Of 446 B-24 Liberators tasked with attacking Omaha Beach, not a single bomb fell on the beach itself. The defenders remained largely intact, grimly awaiting the approaching armada. The Sherman's first taste of combat at Omaha arrived at 06:29, a minute before H hour. Company A, 743rd Tank Battalion, their tanks fitted with deep wading equipment, rolled directly off their LCTs into 4 feet of water. These tanks had been waterproofed with special kits, their exhausts extended with improvised stacks, allowing them to wade through up to 6 feet of water. They were amphibious in a different, more robust sense. The first tanks hit the beach, their tracks grinding against the treacherous shingle as their 75mm guns swung menacingly toward the bluffs. The initial German response was immediate and devastating. An 88mm anti-tank gun in WN-61, one of the few pieces of German artillery to survive the ineffective bombardment, fired 8 rounds in a terrifying 90 seconds. 3 Shermans exploded, their 7-dom ammunition cooking off in spectacular fireballs that could be seen even from the naval vessels far offshore. Machine gun fire sparked off tank hulls like a hellish rain, and mortars systematically walked their way across the beach, bracketing tanks with methodical, terrifying precision. It was a baptism of fire, a nightmare unfolding in slow motion. But the Shermans kept coming. By 0700, 40 tanks were on Omaha Beach. Some were already burning, grim monuments to fallen crews. Others threw tracks on the myriad obstacles or bogged down in the loose shingle, becoming static targets. But those still operational, the engines roaring defiance began to engage German positions with direct fire. The psychological impact on the German defenders was immediate and profound. German infantry, trained to expect a desperate infantry assault, suddenly found themselves facing armor that could absorb their machine gun fire and respond with high explosive shells. It was a terrifying reversal of expectations. Technical Sergeant John Ducone of the 743rd Tank Battalion, having landed in the second wave at 6:40, experienced this firsthand. His tank immediately took 2 hits from a 50mm anti-tank gun. Both rounds penetrated the hull, a stark reminder of the Sherman's vulnerability, but miraculously missed critical components. Ducone's driver, Private First Class Howard Froberg, didn't hesitate. He drove directly at the German position while the gunner pumped 5 rounds of high explosive into the fortification. The anti-tank gun fell silent. This incident wasn't an anomaly. It became the pattern. Individual tank commanders, unable to communicate effectively by radio, saltwater had destroyed most sets, fought what amounted to private wars against specific German positions. A Sherman would absorb multiple hits from smaller caliber weapons, often sustaining damage but remaining operational, while methodically destroying machine gun nests with its 75mm gun and the bow-mounted .30 caliber machine gun. The bow gunner position, unique to American tanks, proved invaluable for suppressing German infantry and covering advancing troops, while the main gun engaged hardened fortifications. It was a testament to both the tank's inherent design and the courage of its crews. By 0730, the crisis at Omaha Beach was starkly evident to naval observers. General Omar Bradley, watching from the USS Augusta, grimly considered diverting follow-up waves to Utah Beach, where landings had been much more successful. The 16th Infantry Regiment had suffered catastrophic casualties. Company A had effectively ceased to exist as a fighting unit, and Company E was reduced from 180 men to a mere 23. The beach was a chaotic landscape, littered with destroyed equipment and wounded men desperately seeking cover behind German obstacles. It was a scene of utter devastation, a testament to the brutal efficiency of the German defenses. But amidst the carnage, the tanks were making a difference, a crucial, tangible difference. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Plugger, commanding Company C of the 703rd Tank Battalion, directed his tanks to engage the formidable fortifications at Le Moulin Draw. They employed a technique honed in training. Tanks would fire white phosphorus rounds to mark targets, then follow with high explosive. The white phosphorus had an additional, unexpected, and utterly terrifying effect. Its burning particles penetrated vision slits and gun ports, creating a hellish inferno inside the bunkers, forcing the defenders to abandon their positions or be incinerated. It was a clever, brutal improvisation, turning a signaling round into a weapon of psychological terror. At 08:15, Widerstands Nest 66 reported to German Sector Command. Enemy tanks on beach. Infantry decimated, but tanks advancing. Request immediate anti-tank support. The response was chillingly sober. No mobile reserves were available. The 352nd Infantry Division's anti-tank battalion was positioned 10 miles inland, held back by Field Marshal Rommel's orders to defend against expected airborne landings. The beach defenders would have to hold with what they had. This strategic blunder, born of Hitler's rigid command structure and Rommel's paranoia about airborne threats, would prove catastrophic. It left the beach defenses fatally vulnerable to the very thing they were designed to repel: a concentrated armored push. The Sherman's mechanical simplicity, often criticized as a weakness, now proved to be its decisive strength. Take, for instance, Tank Barbara of Company B, 703rd WW2 Tank Battalion, commanded by Sergeant Walter Basker. In the first hour of combat, Barbara took 7 hits from various weapons. The tank lost 2 bogie wheels, its turret traverse mechanism was damaged, and it suffered a fuel leak. Yet, the crew, using basic tools and spare parts carried on the tank, made field repairs. By 900, miraculously, Barbara was back in action, engaging German positions at Vierville Draw. This was the Sherman's great, often unsung advantage. A damaged Tiger or Panther, with their complex engineering, typically required specialized recovery vehicles and highly trained mechanics, often taking days or even weeks to bring back into service. A Sherman, however, could often be repaired by its own crew, sometimes even using parts cannibalized from knocked-out tanks lying on the battlefield. Throughout D-Day, Sherman crews performed genuine miracles of field maintenance. Tracks were replaced under fire. Gun barrels, damaged by shell hits, were swapped in a remarkable 20 minutes. Engines that should have required depot-level maintenance were coaxed back to life with sheer improvisation and an almost desperate determination. It was a testament to the ingenuity of the American soldier and the forgiving design of their equipment. At 08:45, the first German armor finally appeared. 2 Stu G-3 assault guns from the 352nd Infantry Division's Assault Gun Battalion engaged the Shermans at 800 meters. Their 75 Stu K-40 guns could penetrate Sherman armor at that range, posing a serious threat. But the American tanks had a crucial advantage: numbers. For every German assault gun, there were 5 Shermans. The Stu Gs managed to destroy 2 Shermans, a heavy price, before being overwhelmed by concentrated fire from multiple American tanks. It was a stark demonstration of the quantity has a quality all its own principle beginning to play out on the battlefield. By 0900, combat engineers, supported by the relentless Shermans, had blown crucial gaps in the seawall at the Easy Red sector. This was the breakthrough moment, the point of no return. Shermans began moving off the beach, engaging German positions from the flank, unraveling the meticulously constructed defensive system. German defensive doctrine hinged on keeping attackers pinned on the beach. Once armor penetrated inland, the entire elaborate system began to collapse, like a house of cards in a hurricane. Private First Class Charles Lombardo of the 701st Tank Battalion had endured a harrowing experience, surviving the swim to shore in one of only 2 DD tanks that actually made it to the beach. His tank, waterlogged and barely functional, somehow managed to engage and destroy a concrete bunker at 100 meters with 5 rounds of armor-piercing ammunition, followed by high explosive. This single bunker had been holding up the advance of an entire infantry company. With its destruction, 150 infantrymen were finally able to move off the beach, transforming a stalemate into an advance. This wasn't about superior tank-on-tank combat. It was about the Sherman's effectiveness against fortifications and its ability to unleash infantry. The German response to this armored breakthrough, when it came, followed established doctrine. Panzerfaust teams, armed with the single-shot anti-tank weapon capable of penetrating 200 mm of armor at 30 meters, were deployed to establish close-range ambushes. In the bocage country behind Omaha Beach, a dense patchwork of ancient hedgerows, sunken lanes, and small fields, every hedgerow could conceal a Panzerfaust team, turning every advance into a potential ambush. It was a deadly game of cat and mouse, But the Americans had learned painfully from earlier disasters at Kasserine Pass in Sicily, where inadequate infantry tank cooperation had led to heavy losses. Infantry tank cooperation had been drilled relentlessly in the months leading up to D-Day. Every Sherman advancing inland now had infantry walking alongside, checking the dense hedgerows and suspicious buildings for anti-tank teams. This seemingly simple tactical adjustment was profoundly effective. The infantry protected the tanks from close-range threats, and the tanks provided heavy fire support, breaking down German resistance. It was the epitome of combined arms, a symphony of coordinated destruction. In the days following D-Day, German armor would eventually arrive in force. Panthers from the 2nd Panzer Division and Tigers from the 101st SS Heavy Panzer Battalion would engage American tanks near Carentan and Villers-Bocage. The pattern of these engagements would prove consistent. German tanks were individually superior in terms of armor and gunpowder. But American tactics emphasized fire and maneuver. While one Sherman platoon engaged frontally, pinning down the German threat, another would skillfully maneuver for flank shots, exploiting the Tigers' and Panthers' thinner side and rear armor. The mathematics, as the original script noted, were brutal but effective. Trading 3 Shermans for 1 Panther was considered an acceptable exchange when America was producing 30 Shermans for every Panther Germany built. This wasn't about winning individual duels. It was about winning the war of attrition. By noon, on D-Day, 51 Sherman tanks were operational on Omaha Beach and its immediate inland areas. They had suffered terrible losses, 40% knocked out or disabled, but they had achieved their mission. The beach was secured. Follow-up waves were now landing without catastrophic casualties. Most critically, the psychological impact on German forces was decisive. The myth of the impregnable Atlantic wall defenses had been shattered, not by a single invincible weapon, but by a relentless, adaptable, and numerically superior force. At German 352nd Infantry Division headquarters, General Dietrich Kreis received fragmentary reports throughout the morning, each one painting an increasingly dire picture. American tanks overwhelming beach defenses. Weiderstand's Nest 66 fallen. Enemy armor advancing on Colville. By 1300, Kreis understood the grim truth. Omaha Beach was lost. Without armor reserves to counter the American tanks, his infantry could only conduct a fighting withdrawal. The Sherman's impact extended far beyond direct combat engagements. Their sheer presence allowed engineers to clear obstacles without being massacred by machine gun fire. Their 75 mm guns could engage fortifications that naval gunfire, often inaccurate and overshooting, couldn't reach. Most importantly, their psychological effect on American infantry was transformative. Soldiers who had been paralyzed on the beach, pinned down by overwhelming fire, began advancing once they saw the tanks moving forward, providing a spearhead and a shield. It was the presence of hope, embodied in steel. Technical innovations implemented specifically for D-Day proved their worth under fire. The deep wading equipment, developed in secrecy and rigorously tested in Scotland, allowed tanks to land in deeper water, bypassing the worst of the beach obstacles. Waterproofed ammunition storage prevented the catastrophic explosions that had plagued earlier tank designs when hit, significantly improving crew survivability. And most importantly, the addition of armored telephones on the rear decks of the tanks allowed infantry to communicate directly with tank crews, even after most radios were rendered useless by salt water. This seemingly small innovation drastically improved the crucial coordination between infantry and armor, a lesson hard won from earlier campaigns. By 1400 on D-Day, American tanks were pushing inland toward their D-Day objectives. The advance was slower than planned. The bocage, a landscape that looked like simple field boundaries on aerial photos, proved to be a formidable and deadly obstacle. These ancient earth walls, some dating back to Roman times, were 3 to 4 feet thick at the base, topped with dense hedgerows, and often fronted by drainage ditches. Tanks attempting to climb over them exposed their thin belly armor to anti-tank fire, creating deadly killing fields for concealed Panzerfaust teams. It was a tactical nightmare, a maze of death. But American ingenuity was already at work, adapting to this unforeseen challenge. Sergeant Curtis Coolin of the 102nd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron, a man with a keen eye for practical solutions, had noticed that German beach obstacles, the formidable steel hedgehogs designed to rip open landing craft hulls, could be cut up and welded to tank bows as improvised hedge-cutting devices. Within hours of landing, maintenance crews, working furiously amidst the chaos, were modifying tanks with these crude but remarkably effective hedge cutters. The idea had originated with a simple observation from a soldier from Tennessee named Roberts. "Why don't we get some saw teeth and put them on the front of the tank and cut through these hedges?" Coolin, recognizing the brilliance in this simple, almost folksy observation, brought it to fruition. This anecdote perfectly encapsulates the American spirit of improvisation and problem-solving, turning an enemy's defense into a tool for offense. The German High Command's response to the Normandy landings was crippled by a paralyzing combination of confusion and Adolf Hitler's personal intervention. The Führer, convinced that Normandy was a mere feint, and that the real invasion would come at Pas-de-Calais, stubbornly refused to release the strategic armor reserves. The 2nd SS Panzer Division, located 130 miles from Normandy, wasn't released until late afternoon, precious hours after the critical window for a counterattack had slammed shut. By the time they finally arrived, American armor had already established blocking positions on all major approaches to the beachhead. This strategic blunder, driven by Hitler's delusional stubbornness, handed the Allies an invaluable operational advantage. At 1600 hours on D-Day, Company B, 743rd Tank Battalion, encountered its first Tiger the Fern near Formigny. This Tiger, from the elite 101st SS Heavy Panzer Battalion, had been dispatched from its position near Caen to halt the American advance. Its tank commander, SS Unterscharführer Wilhelm Müller, was a veteran of Kursk, where his Tiger had reportedly destroyed 19 Soviet T-34s. His 80 mm gun, a weapon of legendary power, could penetrate a Sherman at a staggering 2,000 meters. It was a classic David and Goliath scenario, but this time David had learned a few new tricks. The ensuing engagement demonstrated the tactical evolution American tankers had undergone. Instead of engaging the Tiger head-on, a suicidal proposition, the Sherman platoon leader, Lieutenant James Johnson, ordered smoke rounds fired to obscure the Tiger's vision. While one Sherman maintained suppressing fire, drawing the Tiger's attention, 3 others maneuvered through a small orchard, exploiting the dense terrain. The Tiger, focused on the lone Sherman firing at its frontal armor, didn't notice the flanking movement until it was too late. At 200 meters, a range at which the Sherman's 75 mm gun could still be effective against a Tiger's side armor, Sherman gunners put 5 rounds into the Tiger's engine compartment. The massive tank shuddered to a halt, smoke pouring from its rear deck. Mueller's crew abandoned their burning Tiger, a symbol of German might vanquished not by brute force, but by cunning and teamwork. The psychological impact of this engagement rippled through German forces. If even the legendary Tigers could be destroyed by Shermans, what chance did infantry have? Reports reaching German command painted an increasingly dire picture. Enemy tank strength overwhelming, multiple Tiger and Panther losses, infantry retreating from armored spearheads. The reality was more nuanced, of course. For every successful flanking attack, Shermans paid a heavy price in frontal engagements, but American doctrine, embracing the philosophy of good enough, not perfect, accepted these losses as a necessary cost of war. The Sherman was designed to be easily transported by standard Liberty ships. 2 Shermans could fit in the space required for 1 Tiger. It could be maintained by conscript mechanics with just 3 months of training. Most importantly, it could be produced in numbers that made losses acceptable within the grand strategic scheme. By 1800 on D-Day, the 743rd and 741st Tank Battalions had established a continuous line inland from Omaha Beach. They had suffered terrible losses, 48 tanks destroyed or disabled, with 45 crew killed and 60 wounded. But they had put 58 operational tanks ashore, and in doing so, had broken the Atlantic Wall. German casualties were harder to quantify, but included multiple fortified positions destroyed, 3 assault guns knocked out, 1 Tiger and 3 Panthers destroyed, and hundreds of infantry casualties. The technological lessons were immediately apparent. The Sherman's 75 mm gun, while unable to penetrate heavy German armor frontally, was devastatingly effective against fortifications and infantry, precisely the targets encountered in the initial phases of the invasion. The tank's reliability under combat conditions exceeded expectations. Despite saltwater immersion, treacherous beach obstacles, and intense combat, an astounding 70% of Shermans that made it ashore were still operational at day's end. In stark contrast, of 6 Tiger IIs deployed to Normandy in July, 5 would break down before even reaching combat, a testament to their mechanical fragility. This difference in operational availability was not a minor detail. It was a fundamental strategic advantage for the Allies. A tank that can't move or fire, no matter how powerful its gun or how thick its armor, is just a very expensive, very heavy target. On the night of June 6th to 7th, American maintenance crews, fueled by exhaustion and grim determination, worked through the darkness. Using acetylene torches, they cut up German beach obstacles, the very steel hedgehogs designed to thwart the invasion, and welded crude but incredibly effective hedge cutters to Sherman bows. By dawn on June 7th, 15 tanks had been modified. Within a week, an astonishing 60% of American tanks in Normandy would carry these rhino devices, named for their resemblance to rhinoceros horns. This rapid, field-level innovation, born of necessity, transformed the tactical landscape of the bocage. The Germans, who had relied on their ancient hedgerows as impenetrable defensive lines, were now faced with a new, terrifying reality. The German 352nd Infantry Division's War Diary for June 7th grimly recorded, "Enemy tank attacks supported by massive artillery have made defensive positions untenable. Withdrawal to second defensive line authorized." This represented a fundamental shift in German defensive doctrine. The Atlantic Wall hadn't just been breached, it had been rendered obsolete by American armor and its relentless, adaptive drive. Lieutenant General Omar Bradley, commander of First Army, would later write, with no hint of hyperbole, "The tanks saved Omaha Beach. Without them, we would have been thrown back into the sea." The 29 infantry companies that assaulted Omaha Beach suffered 50% casualties, a catastrophic toll. But the two tank battalions, despite their own heavy losses, maintained offensive capability throughout the day. Their presence, their unwavering advance, turned potential disaster into a costly but ultimately decisive victory. The weeks following D-Day would see the full development of American armored doctrine, refined through the brutal crucible of the Normandy campaign. Operation Cobra, launched on July 25th, would become the ultimate showcase for American combined arms tactics. 3,000 aircraft would carpet bomb German positions, followed by 700 Shermans, 60% of them equipped with the improvised Rhino hedge cutters, punching through the bocage. This breakthrough transformed the Normandy stalemate into the war of movement that American armor was designed to fight. Sergeant Coulin's humble hedge cutter, born of a private's simple suggestion, would become standard equipment. Within 6 weeks of D-Day, 500 Shermans were modified with various hedge-cutting devices. The British developed their own version, called prongs, further underscoring the universal recognition of this innovation's effectiveness. So rapidly did this innovation spread that German intelligence, in a report in August, noted with alarm, "All enemy tanks now equipped with hedge-breaking devices. Bocage defensive positions no longer tenable." It was a technological and tactical triumph that rendered a key defensive landscape utterly useless. The Panther tank remained technically superior throughout the campaign. Its long 75mm gun could penetrate Sherman armor at ranges where the Sherman's gun was ineffective. But technical superiority, as the Germans were learning to their cost, could not overcome numerical inferiority, crippling logistical constraints, and mechanical unreliability. A study by the British Operational Research Section found that in Normandy, Panthers had only 37% operational availability compared to an impressive 70% for Shermans. This wasn't a minor discrepancy. It was a gaping chasm in effective combat power. The mathematics of attrition were inexorable, unyielding. Germany produced approximately 6,000 Panthers throughout the entire war. America, in staggering contrast, produced 49,134 Shermans, with nearly 50,000 total when including all variants. In Normandy alone, over 2,000 Shermans would see combat. Even achieving a 3.1 kill ratio in individual engagements, which German tanks rarely managed consistently, could not stem the tide. For every Panther destroyed, 5 Shermans seemed to appear. For every Tiger lost, 10 more Shermans rolled off ships at Normandy's artificial mulberry harbors. By August 1944, the German armor forces in Normandy were, for all practical purposes, destroyed. The 2nd Panzer Division, which had entered combat with 180 tanks, was reduced to a mere 25. The 116th Panzer Division, from 120 tanks, was similarly decimated. Even the vaunted 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler could muster only 17 operational tanks from an initial strength of 150. The Falaise Pocket in mid-August would seal the final destruction of German armor in Normandy. Caught between converging British, Canadian, Polish, and American forces, German tank crews, facing an overwhelming onslaught, abandoned their vehicles and fled on foot. Allied pilots reported roads littered with burning Tigers and Panthers, their crews unable to maintain or fuel these mechanical monsters during the desperate retreat. The once feared predators of the battlefield became abandoned husks, victims of a logistical and industrial defeat as much as a tactical one. American losses were also severe, a grim testament to the brutality of the fighting. The 743rd Tank Battalion alone would lose 51 tanks totally destroyed in the Normandy campaign, with another 80 requiring major repairs. Crew casualties exceeded 50%. But unlike German losses, American losses were not permanent. For every Sherman destroyed, 2 more arrived from England, fresh from the factories. For every crew member killed, 3 replacements were already in the pipeline, trained and ready to join the fight. The human cost was sobering, but the system was designed to absorb it and continue the fight. Tank warfare in the Bocage was particularly brutal. The average distance of tank engagement was a mere 400 meters, a close-quarters brawl where first shot usually meant first kill. Tank crews, facing constant danger, developed a fatalistic humor. The Sherman Lights, first time, every time, they would joke, referencing Ronson lighter advertisements, a dark nod to their tank's perceived flammability. But they also knew, with a quiet certainty, that their sacrifice, their tenacity in these steel coffins, was enabling victory, inch by bloody inch. Private First Class Wayne Robinson of Company B, 743rd Tank Battalion, would later write movingly about his tank, Barbara. She wasn't the best tank in the world. The Germans had better, but she was there when we needed her. She took us through hell and got us home. That's all you can ask of a tank or a friend. It's a sentiment that transcends mere technical specifications, speaking to the bond between man and machine, and the ultimate purpose of military hardware: to serve the fighting man. The technological evolution continued throughout the campaign. The British Sherman Firefly, mounting a potent 17-pounder gun capable of penetrating Tiger armor at 1,000 meters, began arriving in significant numbers. By August, 1 in 4 British Shermans was a Firefly, giving Allied forces a much-needed long-range punch. American units received 76mm armed Shermans starting in July, giving them improved anti-tank capability, though still generally inferior to the German guns. But the greatest innovation remained tactical, not purely technical. American armor doctrine emphasized combined arms, mobility, and mass. Tanks didn't operate alone, as isolated components of destruction, but as part of integrated teams, including infantry, artillery, engineers, and air support. This systematic, holistic approach to warfare proved far more decisive than any individual weapon system, no matter how technologically advanced. German tank commander Otto Carius, a celebrated ace who destroyed 150 enemy tanks on the Eastern Front, would later write with the bitter wisdom of hindsight: "The Americans understood something we didn't. War isn't about having the best tank. It's about having enough good tanks, fuel to run them, parts to fix them, and men trained to use them. We had the best tanks. They had everything else." It's a powerful and succinct summary of the fundamental strategic miscalculation that cost Germany dearly. Statistical analysis conducted after the war revealed the true, complex story of tank combat in Normandy. The average Sherman in combat was hit 1.2 times. Of those hit, 60% were knocked out permanently, a sobering statistic. However, 20% were repairable in the field, and another 20% required depot-level maintenance, indicating a high degree of reparability that kept tanks in the fight. Crew survival rates were surprisingly high. 75% of Sherman crew members survived their tank being knocked out. This was partly due to the Sherman's large hatches, which allowed for quick egress, and partly due to the American emphasis on crew escape training. Another example of prioritizing the human element. German tanks showed different patterns. Panthers, when hit, averaged 2.3 penetrations before destruction, suggesting they could absorb more damage due to a more robust design and thicker armor. But once hit, a staggering 80% were permanent losses, largely due to the inability to recover and repair these complex vehicles during the rapid and chaotic retreat. Tiger crews had only 45% survival rates when their tanks were destroyed, mainly due to internal ammunition fires and smaller, more restrictive escape hatches. These statistics paint a picture not just of individual tank performance, but of the systemic strengths and weaknesses of each nation's approach to armored warfare. The Normandy campaign fundamentally transformed American armored warfare. Lessons learned in the brutal bocage would be applied across Europe. Hedge cutters evolved into standard dozer blades, transforming tanks into mobile earth movers. Tank infantry telephones became standard equipment, solidifying the crucial combined arms synergy. Most importantly, the mythology of German armored superiority was utterly shattered. American tankers learned they could defeat Tigers and Panthers, not by outmatching them gun for gun or armor for armor, but through superior tactics, teamwork, and an unyielding operational tempo. By late August 1944, as Allied forces broke out across France, the strategic impact was unequivocally clear. Germany had lost not just a battle, but the capacity to conduct mobile warfare in the West. The cream of the Panzer forces lay burned out in Norman fields. Experienced crews, many of whom had survived the brutal fighting on the Eastern Front, were now dead or captured. The training schools in Germany, already struggling with manpower shortages, simply could not replace such irreplaceable losses. The industrial and human resources simply weren't there. The Sherman tank would continue to be criticized by historians who focused solely on technical specifications. Its armor was thinner than German tanks. Its gun was less powerful. Its gasoline engine was arguably more flammable than diesel alternatives. All these criticisms were valid in isolation, if one were to dissect a tank in a vacuum. But war, crucially, isn't fought in isolation. The Sherman was not merely a tank. It was a vital component of a vast, interconnected system, an industrial marvel, a logistical triumph, and a tactical instrument that proved overwhelmingly superior to German alternatives. Admiral Sir Bertram Ramsay, Allied naval commander for D-Day, would later observe, "The success at Normandy wasn't due to any single weapon or tactic. It was the culmination of Allied industrial might, logistical superiority, and tactical adaptation." The Sherman tank embodied all these qualities. It was not perfect, but it was, without question, perfectly adequate for the monumental task at hand. This is a profound lesson for any endeavor, be it military, business, or even personal. Perfection, often an unattainable ideal, can be the enemy of effective, deployable solutions. The long-term impact of the Sherman's success extended far beyond World War II. It validated American military doctrine, which emphasized production quantity, mechanical reliability, and tactical flexibility over technical perfection. This philosophy would deeply influence American tank design throughout the Cold War. The M48 Patton, the M60, and even early versions of the mighty M1 Abrams, while vastly more sophisticated, carried forward these same core qualities: robust, reliable, and produced in sufficient numbers to overwhelm any potential adversary. German military theorist Heinz Guderian, the visionary father of Blitzkrieg, would write in his memoirs, perhaps with a touch of melancholy wisdom, "We made the perfect tank. The Americans made the tank that won the war." There's a profound lesson in that for all military planners, for all engineers, for all strategists. Perfect is the enemy of good enough, especially when good enough can be produced in overwhelming numbers. The memorial at Omaha Beach today includes a preserved Sherman tank from the 743rd Tank Battalion. Its hull still bears the scars from German shells, silent witnesses to the fury of that day. Flowers are regularly placed on it by French civilians who remember with enduring gratitude the liberation it helped bring. The memorial's inscription reads, "To those who came in steel coffins to give us freedom." It's a fitting tribute to the citizen soldiers, the farm boys and factory workers, who climbed into inferior tanks and, through their courage, their innovation, and their ultimate sacrifice, made them superior when it mattered most. In the final analysis, the Sherman tank's success at Normandy and beyond wasn't about armor thickness or gun caliber. It was about American industrial capacity, a relentless assembly line capable of producing 1,000 tanks monthly. It was about farm boys from the Midwest and inner cities maintaining complex machinery under fire, demonstrating remarkable resilience and ingenuity. It was about tactical innovation, like the Rhino hedge cutter, which transformed battlefield dynamics overnight. Most fundamentally, it was about the democratic arsenal, proving that quantity, when coupled with reliability, adaptability, and sound tactics, possesses a quality all its own. The numbers tell the unvarnished story. In June 1944, Germany had approximately 1,500 operational tanks on all fronts. America alone produced 2,000 Shermans that very month. By August, Allied forces in Northwest Europe fielded 4,000 tanks. German forces had fewer than 500. The mathematics of modern industrial warfare had rendered individual tactical superiority, the dream of the perfect weapon, irrelevant in the face of overwhelming systemic advantage. The Tiger might win individual battles, but the Sherman, as part of a larger, unstoppable force, had already won the war. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, who had presciently argued for positioning panzer reserves closer to the beaches, was tragically proven correct in his assessment. In his papers, discovered after his forced suicide in October 1944, he had written with chilling accuracy, "The Americans will come with thousands of tanks, not better than ours, but thousands. We cannot stop thousands." And with a heartbreaking prescience, the war is lost when the first American tank rolls off the beach. On June 6, 1944, at 0629 hours, the first Sherman tanks of Company A, 743rd Tank Battalion, rolled off the beach at Normandy. The war in the West, though hundreds of thousands would still die before its conclusion, was effectively decided at that very moment. The Sherman tank, imperfect, mass-produced, manned by citizen soldiers, had broken the Atlantic Wall and begun the liberation of Europe. The legacy of those 12 hours on June 6th would influence military doctrine for generations. Every major military force would study the lessons of Normandy and conclude that in modern warfare, industrial capacity, logistical superiority, and tactical adaptation matter more than isolated technical specifications. The Sherman tank had not just won a battle. It had validated an entire transformative approach to warfare. In the depths of Norman soil, German tanks still rest where they fell. Tigers and Panthers, engineering marvels that represented the pinnacle of 1940s tank design, slowly rust away, silent sentinels. Their crews, some of the most experienced tank soldiers in history, died manning weapons that were individually superior, but collectively insufficient. They were honored by both sides for their skill and courage. But their sacrifice marked the end of an era when tactical superiority alone could overcome strategic disadvantage. The future, the true path to victory, belonged to nations capable of mass production, rapid innovation, and the systematic, integrated application of combined arms warfare. The Sherman tank, for all its perceived flaws, represented these qualities perfectly. It wasn't the best tank of World War II, but it was, unequivocally, the tank that won World War II. In the arithmetic of modern warfare, that is the only statistic that truly matters.